into dancing. You turn my morning into dancing. 'Cause your love changes everything. Your love changes everything. Oh, there's something about your love. Something about your love changes everything in my body. Oh, something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. It changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. It changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. Changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. Changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. Changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. You turn my morning into dancing. 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 Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything.
Good morning from the Rooted. Matt Ryan, elder from the Rooted Ministries. Pleasure to be with you this Friday morning. As always, yes, the birds are chirping and there's some light in the sky, but I'm recording this Thursday night just as the sun's setting. So I'm not sure if it's this pretty tomorrow morning when you're watching this, but I hope it is. It looks like we've got some summery weather coming. So hope you got your pools open and ready to jump in, right? So we continue to work through 1 Corinthians. Today is, the first time I read this, I thought, what on earth am I going to talk about? Because it's really part of a dense treatise or kind of like a academic argument about the resurrection. And part of it, I think, is sometimes we need to just think about what's the setting here, right? The church in Corinth it's a busy, bustling kind of port city in Greece, right? Greeks, since many years before this, have been a society that always went after higher thinking, right? Argumentation, philosophy. They want to be able to defend everything, and they ask all the questions, and, doubt, of course, makes you do that. But everything in that kind of mindset is about empirical evidence, right? Meaning, what can I see? What can I observe? What can I feel, taste, touch, right? If kind of the I don't want to say scientific, but the mindset of that kind of culture is if I can't see it, if I can't grasp it, if I don't understand it, then I don't believe in it. It's not real, right? And so Paul's really trying to first, he's kind of answering the questions of the time that keep coming around, and he's answering maybe somewhat annoyed, although it's easy for us to read that into it, but his language is certainly harsher than at other times. But he's giving not only a pretty cutting response, but a very convincing argument, especially to a crowd of people who want to have evidence stacked on evidence stacked on evidence. He's walking through every little bit of it and breaking it down from here's what can be observed, here's what can be observed. And based on observations and based on empirical evidence, here's the conclusion. And then he builds those conclusions up to talk about the resurrection being real, being a historical fact, being undeniably true, having this import that will carry on for time. And obviously this couple thousand years later, it has. So we're 55-ish, right? 50 AD, 55-ish AD. So somewhere in the range of 10 to 20 to maybe 30, somewhere in there years after the death and resurrection. And Paul is still out teaching, right? So I just think it's valuable to think about some of those things, especially when it's, sometimes we're digging into verses that are some kind of allegory or some kind of, imagery or a parable or whatever. And there's a story to tell. But this one is really a analytical argument, which of course, me being a philosophy major and someone who talks too much could really get in trouble and do a whole class on. But I want to share it here. Oh, I guess I didn't realize I wasn't sharing yet. Not that one. Not that one. There you go. I think that's the one you can see. So I know oftentimes I read it, but I'm not going to read this one. I kind of want to go through verse by verse. So unfortunately, what I'm reading from is actually from a different version. So you'll notice a couple differences, but because I can't see that screen. So anyway, it starts off with people asking, how are the dead raised and what kind of body do they come? So this what kind of body question is the one that Paul actually answers first. And that's a question that, it's funny, last week or maybe 2 weeks ago at men's group on Thursday night, we got into a pretty deep discussion about what part of the body of Christ are we, right? We hear pop songs, we hear all this imagery to say we're the hands and we're the feet, and everyone kind of worries about, well, which part am I, right? The issue with that is just like the disciples said to Jesus, and here 20 years later or so, people are still asking the same questions. The heart of that is, where do I belong? Where do I rank? What level of importance do I have, right? The disciples asked, who among us is the greatest? And Paul's going, no, you just totally don't understand, right? First of all, being part of the body, the spiritual body, is part of a whole. It's not some physical element to be working, right? Therefore, nobody gets ranked. Nobody gets excluded. Nobody is more or less important. We are all of the same import because we are all wholly loved and redeemed children of God, right? Made in his image. So, right, you can hear the skepticism, right? What kind of body are we going to come in? What's it going to look like, right? Now, again, it might be easy to read that into it, but it really is, if you're from a philosophical standpoint and you're looking for facts, and your job is you keep asking questions until there's none left before you're convinced of a truth. So, okay, fine, we're going to be resurrected. What's it going to be like? How can we be? And the question today would be, what about people who are cremated? Or what about, people who are, torn apart in an accident or blown up by a bomb? How are you going to put that back together, right? We think these things in our limited minds because we can only understand a body as the way we understand it, right? And Paul's just trying to open their minds up a little bit, right? Saying that, the people believe there's no resurrection from the dead, right? Basically, they're saying we don't understand it. We can't see it, so we don't believe in it, like I said before, right? And that's really just an expression of disbelief or unbelief. It's really just a justification for their conclusion. It's not really evidence-based. So he keeps pushing in and pushing in and pushing in with evidence. So that question, like I said, was really hot at the time, right? And we can understand that, if a body is carefully embalmed and placed in a grave, maybe it can come back. But, what about everybody else, right? Or those who are eaten by animals, right? I mean, stuff like that happens where they're digested and they're already in a different form, right? So how could God possibly sort all that out? This is when he's kind of harshly saying, right, how foolish, right? It's not really that foolish of a question when you look at it that way, but the line of thinking that leads to it is totally foolish, right? So he's saying what you sow doesn't come to life unless it dies. That's something to ponder a little bit. What he's talking about, right? You put a seed in the ground. You sowed a seed. And what comes out? It should be another seed, right? What you sowed was a seed. It should reap a seed. How is it possible that this green shoot comes out of the earth when I put a seed in? The seed died because it was split open, and it formed a wholly brand new and different life. Now, what I love about that is the simplicity of that illustration, right? Any child can understand that. Oh, yeah, it turned into something different. Undoubtedly, there is a transformation into something new. So that begs the question, what is the old and what is the new? And of course, that's where he's talking about, yes, there's the first Adam and the last Adam. The first Adam came from dust. The last Adam, which is Jesus, came from the Spirit, right? He was born because God sent his Spirit to the physical body. Everybody else, Adam and all of us, were a physical body. So we were created from the dust with the Holy Spirit, or the spiritual body, being brought to us when we do two things, right? When our mind accepts that Jesus is Lord, and our heart says, I'm going to follow him. He is Lord over my life. When those two things happen, then there's a transformation, and now that spiritual life, or that spiritual body, joins with the physical body that we started with. It's really interesting, I think, to kind of split that hair and think about the differences. And then I'm so impressed by the way that Paul is able to use one bit of evidence after another, after another, after another, right? So, to ask how this can be, right, is foolish, right? Because everywhere around you, there's examples of what's happening. Like I said, plants growing from seeds, or bulbs that are placed in the ground, they die. They lose their consistency. And then a different kind of body emerges. But it's the identical seed that was placed in the ground. Right? You think about it at Easter time. Of course, Easter happens during the spring when all these things are coming to life and all of this new birth. And we always talk about those kind of things. But there's some really clear lessons in that we can observe if we're looking for empirical evidence, right? First is that death is necessarily a part of the process. The seed must die. It must no longer be a seed that can function in order for the new life to form. So death is never an obstacle. It's essential. It's part of the cycle. So if something is going to be raised from the dead, it has to die, right? So the body dies, just like the seed must die. But the body that emerges from the seed is totally different from the one that was planted. Just like our spiritual body is totally different from the one that died, decayed, rotted, dishonored, right? That's how the life of that physical body ends. It always ends. The spiritual one lives on in eternity. The amazing thing is, we are born and given the choice as to whether or not we're going to accept that seed of the spiritual body, whether or not we're going to become that. To me, that lights up a whole lot of this story about a life walking with Christ. A whole lot of different perspective about it's a choice because I make that choice, right? Think about the seed analogy again. The seed doesn't have any control. It's sown. It either gets in good soil or bad. It either gets water, it either gets nutrients or it doesn't, and it bursts forth, right? But we have the sentient mind, and we can choose whether or not we're going to take on that spiritual body. Again, being firmly rooted in God's love and eternal truth, being rooted in his word every day, being his truth, That's the choice we're going to make, right? That's a choice to act embracing and growing that spiritual body, just like we feed a plant, right? I always pray if I'm praying before a meal, if I'm praying before food, whatever public things happen and people ask you to pray, I always say, may this food nourish our body as your word nourishes our soul. I've never thought about it in this context, but this is what that prayer is saying, right? There are two separate parts of me that both equally need nourishment in order to thrive. I don't know. I think it's awesome, right? He goes on to talk about naming off all these celestial bodies, right? Stars, moon, sun, you can see them all. You can see what they do, but what you don't see, you can recognize that they have different levels of brilliance, right? You can recognize that they shine different ways, but you can't see it. You can't see why they do because you can't see them. Yet you believe that they do, right? All bodies aren't alike, right? Talks about the human body is different from a bird body and an animal body and a fish body. Now we're obsessed with having the perfect body, right? Jesus, give me a rocking body. Who hasn't prayed that before, right? Well, maybe there's something to that. Give me that rocking spiritual body. Maybe it's not what's on the cover of all the magazines, right? So if you want to make the argument that all bodies or all flesh is alike, right? Because that's what we're talking about is the flesh. Go to a steak restaurant, order a giant tomahawk ribeye that you're real excited to eat, and they bring you a little piece of broiled salmon. You can't be upset because the bodies are the same, the flesh are the same, right? Now you see it, right? We start to think about these things, and empirically we can see it's so obvious what he's saying, and it's so obviously true, but we just don't put it into that perspective. So anyway, I know that I'm running long. I'm getting real excited about this, right? The idea that our physical bodies are sown, or they come from the dust, and this spiritual body is sown in us as weakness and raised in power, right? It's sown physical, but raised spiritual. Sown in dishonor, raised in glory. Sown perishable, raised imperishable, right? He just keeps going one after another, after another, after another, telling you, you see. So Jesus rises from the dead, but on his body there's marks from the crucifixion. This, makes the apostles absolutely sure. Even Thomas becomes sure because his body has marks. But what a difference. His body's now glorified, right? It's been transformed, just like the seed. It's kind of at a different dimension, right? Because he can pass through doors. He can appear and disappear. He can eat or not eat, right? If it wasn't a body, why would he be eating fish? It was, it could be, he could function in fellowship with people who were not the same, right? Of course, we think of that as a God power, but think about the fact that it's someone who is not human, able to have fellowship with a human. Now, a lot of us think that our pets talk to us, or they understand what we say, or they, their eyes are telling us something, but this is actual interaction with something that is not the same as you, a totally different type of body, right? So it's this spiritual body or this heavenly body having fellowship with earthly bodies. Every way you split it and keep looking at it, it kind of gets deeper and deeper and deeper, right? And then it's proven, right? The first Adam, the last Adam, not the second Adam, but the last Adam. A spirit breathes a breath, and a body of dust becomes a heavenly body. It produces that soul, right? That essence. Sorry, maybe I'm nerding out too much, but I really think there's so much here about, just like, we split the two kingdoms and we really get into a fine hair splitting about the differences between them. It's the same. So, in other words, do I need, in my small mind way, to understand the spiritual body I'm going to have, or the spiritual body that Jesus has, in a physical way? No. I need to not only have faith, but I can look at all these things around me and understand simply and certainly that heavenly body, that body of Christ that I'll become a part of, is much more than this physical body can ever be. I love y'all. I hope that's encouraging. I know that was way long. I'm sorry about that. But hope you have a great Friday and weekend. Let's make it a firmly rooted today, and may someone see Jesus in us today.